What is up? This is the Keyholing podcast with Lemon. Today I'm going to be talking with Wild Arms and Research about some double Ds. Some of our recording did get cut off, so we pick up here where he talks about being a youth.
Coming to America, that was kind of my first time, like, finding out you can own a gun. So being expats from the UK, you tend to hang out with other people from the UK, and there's one family that their dad was part of the Royal Marines or the British Army, one of the two. And he told me and my dad, it's like, have you guys been to the gun range yet? And we got all excited. We're like, you can own guns here? And I think that was the first time it really clicked that someone privately could own a gun, and not just like be a cop or a special agent that you kind of think of as a kid living in the UK, that's the only people that can own a gun.
And so, is that who had guns in media, like cops, special agents, James Bond type stuff?
Yeah, a lot of media is American media. But growing up, you're not going to see films that depict people, like average people carrying firearms in the positive sense. So I think, even if it's American media, it still doesn't click. It doesn't. I think you're too young at that age to fully grasp. But like when you're talking about news, you're only going to see, you're never going to see like skeet shooting or kind of sports shooting in mainstream media there. It does happen. I mean, the UK actually has quite a large firearm community. It's mostly like sport shooting and hunting, but we're talking like, pump shotguns, long barrel pistols, which is it's like a 22 caliber pistol that has if you think brace stocks are funny, you're talking like it has a 16 inch or maybe 11 inch barrel pistol, like a handgun, and then it has like a 12-inch broom handle on the back. It's the goofiest thing, and that's to meet their minimum length requirements to have like a quote-unquote pistol.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, they do try to their credit. They also have, like, handguns were banned in the UK in, I believe, 1996 after the Dunblane mass shooting. But they have workarounds, so you can get like a black powder revolver pistol type thing, but very limited.
And so, like, I understand, like, obviously, like, kind of like spending your formative years there, reconnecting later, how much influence does the legend P.A. Ludi have on your work now, like inspiring you to create, do your own thing, push boundaries?
So when I came to America, I was probably 10 or 11. I got taken to the first gun range ever. My dad took me shooting. He is full British. He wasn't anti-gun, but he was still very hesitant. But he kind of dipped his toes into American culture, even if he didn't have like American there to guide him through it. But, I got to see him buy his first gun, and I got interested in it. We would go shooting for, like, my birthday. I remember I have a photo of me when I was, like, 15 or 16. Like, what I wanted to do on my birthday was just go to a gun shop to look at the guns. I remember when I was in middle school, I would hoard gun magazines. It would almost be like, normal kids had, like, a Playboy magazine. For me, it was, like, just, like, boomer tier gun magazine. It had like tons of like AR-15s in it. I need to kind of find those again because they were really quality magazines. I remember I brought one to school, and when I told someone I had a gun magazine, they thought I meant like the actual,
like an actual magazine, yeah,
not like a physical paper. She's like, don't take that out in school, and I'm like, no, dude, it's just a book. And I still probably would have gotten in trouble for it, but yeah, it started early on. And then I think as I got older through teenager, I got interested in other stuff like skateboarding and kind of teenager stuff. But once I turned 18, that's when I really kind of got into like guns because I was like, oh, wait, I can actually own one. But I didn't have my parents' approval at the time. So I bought my first gun and I didn't really tell them. And I'm sure if they ever saw this, they would be like, what? So yeah, I would actually sneak the gun inside and out of my house because I was still living with them when I turned 18. And it took like a year or two for me to kind of convince them that I was responsible enough to own a gun. Not that I really needed their permission, but I was still living with them, so you got to live. If you're mooching off their house, you got to play by the rules. So that's where I kind of got my start. Um, what was the main question though?
No, no, you're good. Sorry, we should have dove into that. Yeah, you were correct. So I was wondering, like, connecting. And by the way, I have another side question here. So are your parents still here?
Yeah, they're in the U.S. Or actually, no, they've left, but they're coming back to the U.S.
Oh,
But
okay.
they're citizens.
Oh, awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
But so I was wondering, like, obviously, like your dad being British, you growing up there for a short period of time. What influence does PA Ludi have on your
Okay.
work? Like being in like a similar type space, pushing boundaries, things of that nature.
So before I could own a gun, I was kind of got into prepping, and one of those things was getting into the books. So I actually was able to find a paperback copy of a PA Ludi book, which I think I bought on Amazon, and I don't think you can actually get a paperback of this anymore. You can only get a PDF or a used copy. So the idea is I wanted to kind of make my own gun. I may or may not have been of age when I wanted to. Obviously, I couldn't make a PA Ludi, but I toyed around with the idea of like converting paintball guns and things like that. And that's why I got into when I got turned 18, I could actually buy guns. P. Ludi, his book stayed on my shelf, and I would probably once a year go through it. And I've always wanted a P. Ludi gun. Obviously, you can't make a one-to-one replica and be legal in the U.S. So I haven't done that, but I've always kind of wanted to. And as I was getting started into YouTube for in the gun space, because I've had a YouTube channel now for probably 15 years, and it's kind of morphed from skateboarding videos to I got into like documentaries. One of those documentaries was covering PA Ludi, so I dug really deep. I even did FIO request, which is Freedom of Information Act requests on his prison records. I actually spoke to his brother to get more information. He commented on my documentary, and then I was able to, get an email contact with him. So I had a pretty good conversation. So I definitely connected with PA Ludi. It is a shame. I don't know if your audience will know, but he passed away in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, from cancer. Uh, but he had a profound effect on my life. And my first book, the first edition, was the front cover was very much modeled after his book as like a memento to him, and he's dedicated in that first book because he had a huge role in me getting started in this.
That's awesome, and that's so cool getting to like be in contact with his brother and kind of like put like tribute to him the work you're doing and find inspiration in that. And I think that's so important because I think that's what the next generation is going to view you as. Not to like toot your horn too much, but I think people really connect and see, wow, you can do this. People see your joke tweets where someone says, the gun's going to blow up if you shoot it," and you're dunking on them with, "This is me shooting a 3D printed rocket launcher." And I know that's so inspiring for so many. And I think that's so cool how humanity, through Ludi to you, to the future creators, seeing that chain of innovation and of inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, I think what helps is seeing someone else do something big or an important thing. Not saying that my stuff's like important or big.
It definitely is. I'm
in
going
the
to interrupt
sense
you. It
that,
definitely is important and big.
but in the sense that it's like once you know it's been done and it's possible by the average person, it opens up people's confidence to try it themselves. And that happened to me with before I built my Panzerfaust, which was the topic of the first book. Someone had built a RPG-2, which is kind of like not a direct copy of a Panzerfaust, but it's definitely inspired a little bit by the Panzerfaust and some other designs. The RPG-1 was kind of an independent design. Then when they got to the 2, that's the more famous one. That once I saw someone else playing with that, I was like, wait, I could probably do this. This isn't rocket science, because the first one isn't rocket science. I would get into that later with book number 2. but just seeing someone else do something, I think that's a huge motivator for people to be like, okay, I can try this. So with doing the books yourselves, I don't think I would have come up with making books if I didn't have P.A. Ludi and the other authors. There's other authors too that made great books. And I've got an entire collection of them. And throughout my, buying and trading firearms over the years, the book collection, I've never sold that, and I don't think I ever will, because that's probably had the most impact on me.
And that's so awesome. And I think that's something you can tell in your books is how much you put into it, how invested you are in it being quality, how invested you are in it being helpful to people. And you can tell almost how much books had an impact on you just by how comprehensive it is. It is truly in depth. It is not um, a Cliff Notes AI typed up summary. It is quality work that is explained from a normal person to another normal person.
And that's a big part of it. With my first book, which is the first edition of the Expedient recoilless launcher Panzerfaust, that actually was not a great, objectively was not a good book, in the sense that there were a lot of grammar errors, there were a lot of spelling errors. But that's how you learn, is you have to start somewhere. And for me, on that book, and that's why I redid it. There's a second edition of that book that I took the spirit of the book, I found all the errors, I corrected them, and then I expanded on it a lot more. But you have to start somewhere, and I'm not a writer. I grew up like dyslexic. I had to, it took a lot of effort to make sure it was a quality book. And if you've never been through the process of like publishing a book, there's more went into learning how to write the book and format it, and the rules behind kind of how you can publish these books and not be as liable for them. More effort went into making the book for that than making the actual launcher itself. And it probably cost more to make that book too, at least the initial run. But throughout the books, I started with the Panzerfaust. I wasn't happy with that book. But when the Fliegerfaust came around, I started to like, okay, I've got a formula, I've got a system. The photo quality is improving. It's coming out a lot better. And then the M202 book came out, which is the third one. And then I redid the first book, and now I'm working on a fourth book. And the level of research in this new book, which is covering hypervelocity kinetic energy rockets, which is kind of what I'm expanded to, which is like really advanced weapons. Because anytime I post any of my stuff on social media, someone inevitably will say, "Where's the boom? Where's the explosion?" And we'll probably go in this later, but the destructive device is the launcher, and then the ammunition is limited to a 1/4 ounce of explosive, and anything higher needs a new destructive device tax stem, which is a $200 addition for every single round of ammo you fire. And you also need an explosive magazine to also fire those. And if you're making books like this, you can't use explosives for this book unless you have an exemption or you're doing it under an exemption. So I was very limited, so I have to use chalk. But with this latest book, you don't need explosives if you're going hypervelocity, which is like, almost twice the speed of an AR-15 bullet, plus like, quadruple, 10 times the weight of the projectile. So you're dealing with a lot of mass going really fast. So you don't need explosives to do, penetrate armor or anything like that.
And I think that testing process is so important. Like talking about like feeling out the book process is really important. Like really important to see, because it parallels so much of what we do with 3D printed weapons, right? Trying things out, getting adjusted to your first printer, which wasn't Ender 3, by the way, if I believe. I believe. And so it's that trial and error and staying committed and learning more, and that drive to learn and grow. And you did mention briefly to the destructive device. We will go and get into that. Is it, and you mentioned that, so a lot of people ask this, it is true that each rocket has to be registered as a destructive device, right?
So we'll clarify this. So
Yeah, let's just start there. From a person who I like the videos and I do like the wow, cool, it shoot. So start there. What is a destructive device?
yeah, so the law defines it in two different parts. So one part of the law is it's a destructive device firearm, which is any firearm that has a bore, which is like the barrel caliber, over half an inch in diameter, is subject to the NFA, which is the National Firearms Act, the same law that machine guns and SBRs and silencers are all regulated under. Um, if the barrel is over a quarter of an inch diameter, for it to not be a destructive device, it has to have a sporting exemption or another type of exemption. So, like a 12 gauge shotgun obviously has a higher bore diameter than half an inch, but I think it's under the Secretary of State or one of the other politicians arbitrarily decides what has a sporting purpose, and 12 gauge was going to make that cut no matter what. So you have a firearm that has a bore over half an inch. You don't have a technical sporting purpose, and you don't want to spend $50,000 for an attorney to try and convince the ATF that your device or ammo is sporting related. Now you have a destructive device, so you have to register that. You have a couple options. You can buy it, which is going to a store. You put down a form 4 to buy it, which I don't. I think most people at this point have done a Form 1 or a Form 4 to buy a suppressor or SBR. With how easy it is nowadays. When I got started, you still had the year wait times. I think a lot of kids nowadays have a very spoiled experience because I was doing paper forms.
And for the new people, you did have to pay the $200 as well. Like,
yeah. And destructive devices did not get changed in the recent law. You still have to pay $200 per tax stamp for machine guns and destructive devices.
Correct.
So
it was only
that list.
it was only SBRs and silencers,
and any other weapons.
yeah, and AOWs. And so you kind of like touches on that arbitrary, like just arbitrarily deciding what you do have to pay a tax stamp for, and what you submit a $0 tax stamp for.
So there's a few examples of things that got kind of pushed under that exemption. So there's like that, I think 950 JD round or something, just a giant mother of a gun. They've allowed that, and I'm sure the inventor of that cartridge paid a lot of money. I think the 750 Nitro is another one that got approved, and these are like safari level guns. Like they're just huge, and I think that's why they got approved. But fortunately, I think the biggest caliber you can really go is like a 50 BMG before you need to start doing tax stamps. And the anti-gun side do not like that. And they've been trying actually to get 50 caliber to be classified as a destructive device, especially with the cartels buying straw purchasing Barretts and smuggling them into Mexico. That's quite caused a lot of anti-gun groups to try and nip 50 cal in the butt, but fortunately they're not been successful.
No, but they are trying. While we're talking, they are currently trying to do that. There's been multiple state efforts to raise the stamp cost to the original 1940s adjusted rate. Like, there's been multiple efforts to price people out and add more restrictions to what people can and can't own.
Gotcha. So you have the firearm elements. I think we understood now that a destructive device firearm like a 40 millimeter grenade launcher, that's probably the most common one. Next to that is going to be 20 millimeter guns. Those are going to be the most common, the most affordable. And then you have the other element, which is the explosive side. So you have a destructive device firearm and a destructive device explosive. Now the explosive basically is broken down into like hand grenades, mines, explosive projectiles, rockets that are explosive, incendiary, or poisonous that have a certain weight limit to the propellant. So it covers all of that. So in general, the rule of thumb is if your projectile has more than 1/4 ounce of explosive or incendiary material, it is a destructive device. It is an explosive. It's a bomb to the law. And if for the so the Panzerfaust doesn't shoot a rocket. That's kind of the misconception. There is no rocket motor. So what a rocket is essentially, this is not a firearm. This is not a anything that can be regulated by YouTube or not. But it's just a part. So with a rocket motor, you have propellant inside the tube, and if you can't see podcast users, I'm holding up kind of like a tube. Inside the tube, you have propellant, and then you'll have a nozzle and an enclosure, and you burn the inside propellant out, and it pushes the rocket forward. That's what you would consider a rocket. The Panzerfaust is using a projectile, and then the powder is behind the projectile, just like a bullet, except you don't have a chamber behind the powder. The powder, you just have a sheer quantity of powder that is in little chambers of, you'll have like 5.4 ounces of black powder, and it's segregated into 6 chambers of black powder. And once you ignite one chamber, it starts a chain reaction between the other. And that's what kind of builds up the pressure slow enough to where you push the projectile, it doesn't blow up the tube, and it exhausts all the excess gas out of the back. So with the Panzerfaust, it's not a rocket. So the only law that applies to the Panzerfaust is the explosive limit to the projectile. So you have a 1/4 ounce of leeway in there. But let's say the Fliegerfaust, which is the book number 2, which is a World War II anti-aircraft volley-fired, salvo-fired rocket launcher. If you had more than 4 ounces of rocket fuel in that rocket and more than a 1/4 ounce of explosive, any amount of explosive in the warhead, then that device is now an explosive device or a destructive device. So you have 4-ounce limit when you have any explosive or incendiary payload. You have a 4-ounce limit on how much propellant you can have if it is a rocket motor. And if it's any projectile, you have a 1/4 ounce of explosive payload limit. And then if you want to go above that, you can. As an individual, you can. So the rocket fuel is not regulated as an explosive, so that's a bonus. If it's ammonium perchlorate composite propellant, that got ruled in court to be not explosive, so it can't be regulated. But the gunpowder you use for like a 40 millimeter chalk round, that 38 blank, which is what pushes out, becomes regulated when you load it into the ammunition. So it goes from a pistol round to an explosive or an explosive material once you plug it in the back of a 40 millimeter grenade, even if it's a chalk round. So you have destructive devices laws and you have explosive regulation, which affects how you can store it and travel with it. So another rule of thumb is if with everything is you don't keep it loaded in your home. And you don't travel with the ammunition loaded. You just keep it separate. So with a 40 millimeter round, you keep your 38 blank separate. And while you're traveling with it, that 38 blank is considered pistol ammo. So you're exempt from explosive regulations. And the other thing is just inert. It doesn't have anything in it. So it's just, a dummy round. So when you get to your testing site or firing wherever, your local gun range or your friend's backyard, you just pop that 38 special blank in there and you have an explosive. But you can make explosives as a civilian. You could make C4 if you wanted to. There's nothing stopping you. The only thing is you can't go to bed at night with it and you can't travel down the road with it. So getting into this field is quite kind of scary for most people if they don't understand that. And I think when you look at the laws, it can freak a lot of people out. Hopefully I did kind of a good job simplifying as much as possible.
I think you did a great job, but I think that does contribute. Like, we see people misconceptions on Twitter or responding to you all the time saying this is illegal, this isn't, or that's not real, whatever it may be. But the laws being so absurdly nuanced I feel like, contributes to the misconceptions around launchers. Have you found that to be the case?
and it's very arbitrary. So like when I'm going back to the 40 millimeter grenade launcher, you go from a 38 special blank. No one is concerned about that ammunition. No, you could have 10,000 of them in your house.
It wouldn't raise eyebrows at all. Yeah.
Yes, it won't. You stick that 38 blank into a plastic piece of projectile, it now becomes almost the same as C4. Now, the ATF kind of regulates low explosive and high explosive a little differently, but for the common man, they're basically treated the same. You need a storage magazine. You have to. It's kind of debatable, but you probably need a license to have it. And to travel with it, you need a storage magazine that's approved for your vehicle. So these laws are extremely arbitrary. They have very little, it's not written by someone who understands explosives. It's written by a politician that's just, when these laws were written, it wasn't done by AI, but I imagine it's AI-esque kind of like understanding of it. It's just like, oh, this is an explosive. This needs to be treated the same way as something that's high explosive that, you could buy like 100 pounds of tannerite and they're not going to buy it. You bat an eye to it. But when you buy, a case of 38 blanks and you store them at your home inside the 40 millimeter chalk round, you can go to jail for that. And it's just very arbitrary.
It's absurd, and I think it's viewed by politicians the same way as they view guns in general. As guns bad, explosives bad, they're scary, and things of that nature. And I think that really, it's just ignorance as far as
and there's not nuanced understanding of what it is. So obviously we all want these things to be not regulated. I think that's probably a common consensus among gun people. But when you're talking to the average person, I mean, if you explained it to them in detail, like this blank I can own fine. I shove a blank in this, it becomes something incredibly different. I think that most people would understand that, but the way these laws were written, none of the gun groups really took a hard stance on it. I think there was some consultation a few years back, because when they were clamping down on the explosive regulation exemption for small arms ammunition, there was not any real clarity of where small arms ammunition ends and it becomes something else. So like a 5.56, when does it turn into an RPG-7 high explosive rocket? In the law, they don't really clarify that. And the ammunition companies and the gun companies, I think they tried to band together, but I'm sure they settled. So right now, anything that's for a Title I firearm is usually exempt from explosive regulation. But anything above that that's not a signaling device is now an explosive material. And that creates a big problem for, the average person. That can get caught up in something as minor as, putting in a blank into something so simple. And now it's a crime.
No, definitely. And we're talking about like millimeters difference, right? Like a lot of people, like there's commercially available 37.5s millimeter launchers, which are towing the line. And
yeah, I mean, there's going to be, I think I work with a few companies, do consulting work, but I'm pretty sure one of them is going to come out with like a 38, 37 millimeter chalk round. And it's not that far different from a 40 millimeter. I don't know the specs because I didn't help develop that round, but I've just seen what they're advertising, right? And I'm pretty sure this is on their social media. But, one chalk round is exempt and one is not. And the only difference is that one is made to spin and the other one has stabilizing fins. That's it.
And it really, like you talk about how normal people don't understand that. It's really similar to the SBR thing. Oh, 16 inches is good, 14 and a half is bad. Or the silencer, it has to be pin and welded to contribute to the length. Those cultural arguments really contributed to the mass movement for the SBR and silencer. Do you think a similar movement could happen with destructive devices? It kind of... not a mass deregulation, but some restrictions rolled back?
I think when you come to machine guns and destructive devices, I think most gun companies are going to throw them under the bus. They're an easy thing to throw under the bus as like a compromise. So like if we're a pro gun organization, it's a much easier sell for a silencer or an SBR than it is to say let's start allowing grenade launchers. Even though they're legal and you can still make new ones, I think machine guns have a better chance of being deregulated, or at least being allowed to be put on the registry, new ones, than it is for destructive devices to be lowered in price. So let's say you can make a hand grenade without the $200 tax stamp. Everyone and their mother that has gotten a silencer in the last 3 months or whatever it's been, since 2.5, 3 months, is going to make a hand grenade. I can see that now. But with that $200 tax stamp, that's actually a barrier. Most people are not going to do that. And they can get it without, as long as you use binary explosive, they could make it. But most people aren't going to do that. And it's a very hard sell for the gun groups. I don't think they're going to touch it. I think they have a better chance getting machine guns deregulated, at least a little bit, at least an amnesty, rather than, outright everyone can now do Form 1, Form 4, brand new machine guns.
And so, talking about those misconceptions, what are some misconceptions you run into when speaking to the public? I know often I see that's going to blow up in response to you, or your hands aren't going to last very long. What are some common misconceptions you see in interactions with people online?
Well, the first one that I got was I'm holding, and I posted about this today on my Twitter account, but you're holding the Panzerfaust wrong. That one has bugged me so much.
Oh, yes, I saw this.
For the last 5 years, I've even got negative reviews on Amazon because someone has said you were holding it wrong on the front cover. And it has irked me to this day, because there is countless examples of various different militaries using this weapon in a variety of different ways, and including Germans teaching other Germans to shoot it on the shoulder rather than under the armpit, which is what's commonly seen. So there's many ways to shoot the same thing. There's many ways to grip a pistol. There's many ways to hold a rifle. There's also many ways to shoot a Panzerfaust. But there's a lot of people that think they know the weapon and there's only one way to fire it. When in reality, there's only one way to really shoot it wrong, and that's to put the Panzerfaust on your chest and shoot it, because it's a backblast type of weapon. So I also posted that so people can understand there's many ways to shoot it, but there's one way to shoot it wrong, and that's to blow a hole through your chest. But going to the other stuff, I mean, when we're talking about a rocket launcher, I mean, you can make an entire rocket launcher from non-metal components. Because all the pressure is being contained inside the rocket motor, and the pressure inside the rocket motor is drastically less than what is in a firearm. So like when we're looking at a 5.56, inside that bullet, when it's fired, you're looking at like 55,000 psi pressure, which is insane. That is a huge amount of pressure, but that's how bullets work. You use an extremely large amount of pressure to push out a bullet, squeeze it through a really tight tube, throw it out of the barrel. But with a rocket motor, a bullet's going to have that pressure for maybe 10, 30 milliseconds. With a rocket motor, you have like 500 milliseconds, so you're burning that pressure a lot slower. With that lower pressure, which you wouldn't go over 2,000 to 3,000 psi in a rocket motor. You can make it out of a lot simpler and lighter materials. So you can make it out of carbon fiber. You can make it out of fiberglass that's been impregnated with a bit of carbon. You can make it, out of phenolic liners. You can make rockets out of very simple materials. Aluminum. My most recent rocket motors, it's almost all aluminum, off the shelf. 61 aluminum. That opens the windows to a lot more homemaking capabilities. So people will be like, you can't print a 3D rocket launcher, and the rocket launcher is the easy part. You could probably print that entirely. If you had a long enough printer, you could print an entire rocket launcher. It's what the rocket motor is the tricky part. Even then, you're dealing with a fraction of the pressure of a bullet. The downside is when a rocket does fail, it tends to fail quite spectacularly. It's called a CATO, or very rapid disassembly of the rocket motor, and that'll send shrapnel and flame everywhere. So you got to be careful with that, obviously.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we've seen that a little bit in some rebel groups where they're making these rocket launchers with scraps, right? Where we've seen some awful fails that would.
Yeah, I think I know the one you're talking about, and it was in Myanmar, and some poor bastard was holding either a homemade RPG or a factory RPG that is shooting either spiked ammo or ammo that is homemade, and that poor guy got his head blown off, and in the video you just see the whole head roll off, and that's probably the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. And going forward now, even before that video became viral, I started shooting my launchers on remote stands. Now being a father, I think everyone can relate that safety comes first. You don't want to take away that from your kids. So safety is a huge deal to me. So I tend to shoot everything off, a remote stand. But I have fired the Panzerfaust considerably on the shoulder, and I think I've probably let 4 or 5 people shoot that off the shoulder. So with the black powder stuff, it's reliable, it's consistent as long as you do it right. There's cases of I'm sure you know Adam from Ballistic High Speed, his famous RPG blow up video.
Absolutely.
From my understanding of the situation, he was firing a re-welded RPG, which is when you take a deactivated RPG. So to import them into the U.S. for like wall hangers or souvenirs, they take a real RPG 7. They cut giant holes into the launcher. They weld a bunch of stuff inside to seal it up. And then what this company did, I'm not going to name who they are, but they patched up these holes with new welds. And from my understanding, this held for a long time. They fired dozens of rounds out of this, and it's held. But in this particular situation with Adam, it looks like the propellant charge was drastically larger than what the average size propellant charge is. And when they fired this, that welded patch broke. And fortunately, it wasn't pointed at his head, because I think if that was the case, it would have blown his face off. It was pointed down into his ballistic vest. I think that's what saved his life, to be honest. So that's the danger. When you're making like a DIY recoilless launcher, rocket launcher, you've got to design something to where if it fails in the safest way possible. If you're going to shoot on your shoulder or remotely, because even if something fails, it can still send shrapnel 20, 30 feet away from you and hit you and kill you. So when you're designing something, I would not recommend ever taking something that has intentionally been destroyed past the point of no return and trying to jerry-rig that into something usable. I would always recommend people to start with a fresh tube, start with known materials. You know what the burst pressure is on this, metal that you're using, and then remote test as much as possible. I know people want to shoot on the shoulder, do like 10 tests before you ever, and with the same propellant loading, don't start messing with anything. I recommend, this powder load, just like what you would do with a, regular small arms ammunition. Your 5.56 is going to fire because it's loaded with the same powder every time. It's loaded with the same primer. You should treat that the same way as you do with the black powder stuff, because it can be deadly. And fortunately, Adam is still with us, and he's with us blindly because the drunk guy who welded up, cut out the barrel, did it at the bottom and not the side.
Yeah,
and that's kind of
lucky. Like it's luck, pretty much.
Yeah.
And also, like, do this with other people, right? Have someone have med stuff available if possible. Have someone there, like, with you.
And know where, like, your local ER. I mean, I've unfortunately had one accident during my testing. So I've been doing this 5 years. I've gone out over dozens of times firing different rockets, different platforms, and I have had one accident that was, required ER service, and we had medical staff on hand. We had medical, kit on hand. But the problem is we were an hour away from the ER. Unfortunately, the injury was it wasn't minor, but it was enough to where he wasn't going to bleed out in a couple of minutes. It was, we were able to drive him an hour to get to the hospital. That's because we were in the middle of nowhere, very far from, any cities. But yeah, take that into consideration. If you're testing, be like, where is the closest ER? And if, God forbid, you're bleeding out, you got to be able to know what number to call for an airlift, because you might be to shoot a lot of this stuff. You have to be in the boonies. You're not going to shoot this at your local indoor range. So, being very methodical of like, okay, worst case, I'm hurt, I'm bleeding out, I've got a tourniquet. How do I get to a hospital? If no one's with me, who do I call?
Yeah, what are my coordinates? Like things of that nature, because you can control as many variables as you can, but there's still, even with all that control, there's still room for human error or mechanical error.
In complacency, I think that's the biggest thing, and that's kind of what bit me on the ass, or Nick for this case, who got a kind of an injury on the ass, was complacency. It was, we've tested all these rockets, we got you comfortable, and then you make mistakes, and they do happen, and it's human error, and you have to own up to it. And I think that's a big part, and I address it in the third book, because it was an easily preventable accident, but complacency is will rear its ugly head as soon as you give it the opportunity. So yeah, I've always taken safety a big concern, but even more going through that and experiencing, not to the level that Adam did with his RPG blowing up. I think that was much more life threatening, but just having a taste for it, I think that's an important thing to be prepared for. If you're going to get into this, I would always recommend people to start with 37 millimeter, which is legally, like, you don't have to invest into, tax stamps. It's a good way to get a good foundation in the principles, but the entry cost is a lot lower. And like, once you learn like the proper etiquette of how to load the ammunition, how to safely use it, I think that's a great way to get into more advanced stuff. Than if you were going to go from you're shooting Bubba's shotgun and now you want to make an RPG. I think 37 millimeter or 38 millimeter is the gateway to get into the bigger stuff.
And that's like a great recommendation. I think people think, oh, I have to jump from this to this. No, there are steps you can do. There are steps you can go. Like, for example, if you haven't 3D printed anything yet, I don't know if I would recommend this being your first print or anything of that nature.
Yeah, it's like, before you go to a full Orca build, maybe you should print like a Glock frame, or maybe you should start on something a little more simple, like a little 22. A great way to just get practice. You learn the fundamentals. You're not investing a ton of money and ton of time. I mean, with my M202 print, that took a month to print. That was the longest thing I've ever printed, but that took a month of solid printing. Like, it was my printer. I had one printer, and it was going the entire month. And I had failures. I had a print that was going for 5 days, and it failed on the 4th and a half day.
Oof, that's some pain right there. Oh.
Yeah. And I was printing in PA6, so like each kilogram or whatever, I think it was fine in 2 kilogram rolls. It was like $160 down the drain in one print. So it adds up. So I'd start small. There's tons of smaller designs. I think the Hitchhiker is a good one. FGC 9. All these kind of like low caliber, and then you can work your way up to more advanced stuff.
Definitely. And talking about like working your way up, what you're working on now. So talking about the velocity, what kind of like inspired you to go this direction? Is it just the direction your work happened to take, or how did that?
So, I've gotten the comment frequently, like, where's the boom? Where's the explosion? And I don't have the finances to do explosive testing. And explosives you need to be a professional to at least, to safely do it. You can do explosives as an average person, but the chance of you blowing your fingers off is pretty high. But when you're so I took the focus, like, I'm not comfortable yet with getting investing tens of thousands of dollars into getting an explosive license, getting a storage magazine, getting land to test on that is zoned that I can do this, get a fire marshal approval. Let's focus on kinetic energy. And I was doing a lot of study into, kinetic energy rockets. And through my research, I started the most common ones are huge rockets that were strapped to the top of Humvees, and we're talking like a 150-pound rocket, giant thing. You're not going to make that, as a hobbyist. I mean, you could, but it's very advanced. So, looking at these hypervelocity rockets, which is just like rocket motor, penetrator, and it just goes really fast, and then once it burns out, it's at its peak velocity, and then it hits the target. And they're very effective at what they do because it's just going so fast. But I kept finding smaller and smaller, lesser known designs, and then I think last year, or the very end of 2023, or no, end of 2024, someone found a patent for the perfect rocket for me, which was a 1-inch diameter by 4-foot long hypervelocity rocket that was made from really cheap materials like aluminum tubing that was used for conduit tubing. So it was a really simple design. It didn't require any expensive tungsten penetrator. It was purely just, we go really fast, and it doesn't matter what we're made out of, we're going through it. So, it didn't require a ton of fuel. It was very simple to make. The hard part was making it work because now we're in rocket science, it actually is pretty tough. We have a super long and slender rocket motor. So you have propellant, which is like a cylinder, and then inside that cylinder is a hollow space. And when you burn a rocket motor, you're burning inside out. And that's just the way most rocket motors work, especially with composite propellants. So when you have a super long rocket motor, the speed of that gas going down going down that core, the more gas that there is, the higher the speed is going. It's going to rip chunks of propellant off, and that's called erosive burning. And once that happens, you have more surface area of the propellant. I'm going to try and keep the science to a minimum. But basically, when that erosive burning happens, it creates a runaway effect. Kind of like when the printer has a runaway thermal reaction, it can cause a fire in your printer. The same with a rocket motor, but it's with pressure. So it's like you're trying to shove, if you slam a toothpaste bottle, there's only so much that can come out the nozzle of that toothpaste bottle. So it's going to pop the bottle or squirt it out even faster. But in this case, the rocket motor will explode. So to make this design work, you have to do a ton of different. You have to change either the chemical composition of the rocket motor, or you have to find a way to prevent it basically pushing a gas out too fast. So that is what I've been working on for the last, say 6 months, is taking this design, trying different things, and try to do it cost effectively. So I started with commercial propellant, which is propellant that you could buy as a hobbyist. Let's say you're a rocket enthusiast, rockets that go up in the sky. You can buy propellant. I was trying to use that propellant and make it work for this design. But the problem with that propellant is when it gets to a high pressure, it has that runaway effect. So I've had to scrap that. So the last 2 tests, I got a ton of good data. I've got a rough idea of how much pressure my rocket motor design can handle. But one second. Once I realized those weren't going to work using commercial propellant, I was able to, or now I found some really good ways to change the chemical composition, as well as using inhibitors to reduce the amount of pressure that and flame and exhaust and gas that is going down this core. So that's been the challenge, and that's what I'm currently working on. But while I'm working on that, I have been doing a ton of research and getting never seen before, never digitized photos from NASA, from the military, from the government, getting all these things that have never been seen before by the average, since it was been created. And that's what's going all into this book. So I think my largest book now is almost 100 pages. Now, my books are pretty big, so each page can take a lot of content. But with the amount of research that I've spent on this, and it's been 3 years of gathering research, I mean, I think this book is going to be like 200 pages. It's going to be the most in-depth book on kinetic energy rockets that's ever been published. So I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. And you mentioned affordability. That's like a big aspect for you, as far as not only being able to test, but people being able to make their own. Your books being affordable, $25. Like, we're talking about for a book. Like, it's ridiculously affordable. And your information being available. Part of your drive is, like you mentioned, people being able to see these things that have never been seen before or have been lost to time. And what have you found is the reason most of these things have been lost? Is it classification things, barriers coming down? Is it record keeping, or?
I think it's a combination of like kind of all those things. So it depends on the design. So with my design, it came out of 1960s. It was patented, it was developed, it was tested. But the problem is no company picked it up because there were, at the time, using explosives was more advantageous. So like your targets, each of your targets, there are millions of dollars worth of aircraft or tanks. And it's cheaper to just go with explosives. You don't need to go fast with explosives. So your rocket can be even simpler, more cheaper to make because you're putting all your emphasis on explosives. But when your targets are a lot cheaper, and then, with the advent of guided munitions, that made that even more effective with explosive warheads. If you can guide this rocket and explode it right where you want it to, it makes sense paying $100,000 per rocket if you guarantee you can get a hit. But the problem is with drones and similar cheap technologies, now the cost ratio between projectile to target is drastically changed. I mean, it's not efficient to shoot a $500 drone with a $500,000 rocket. The scale of usability is now drastically changed. So I think back then it didn't make sense to use those type of rockets, and I think it kind of faded into history. And I only found it through sheer luck of someone on Twitter in one of my research, what are they called? Research bounties, which I think is something that I kind of started up. Is I offer people money to find certain things that I can't locate myself, and this is not typically things you're going to find just going through Google.
This isn't a search on YouTube. This is in-depth research. This is digging until you can't dig anymore.
Exactly, and I like to think that I've uncovered every rock. I've uncovered everything with this current project. The main focus on this rocket has been called the Swizzle Stick. I must have reached out to at least 20 different major organizations, whether it be a museum, an archive, an institution, a government agency. I've even file requested the ATF. Like, I've sent them requests to look through there because they have a huge reference collection. I even asked them to look. Are they going to look? I don't know, but I asked them to. So yeah, a lot of time has been put into this, and that's why I think it's important to keep that research alive. And one thing I've noticed through this project is that a lot of the engineers that are working on it are in the age that they're passing away now. So since I started, there have been 3 people that I've either tried to contact or was going to contact that died after I started this project or very recently. Which, a lot of this history, and I'm all about the weapons too, but I think history is a huge part of what I do in keeping it alive. And we're at the cusp that a lot of these designs that are cost effective, that are usable for civilians, are, a lot of this technology is dying away with with these engineers that are passing away, and a lot of their information is not being, saved or not published to the general public. And that's what I hope to fix with my book.
Which is so important, and I think information itself, as we talk about like lost media as more of a like modern concept, like they may have just like these tests may have not even been recorded at certain points. So you're looking for something you may not even know exists, and digging so far, like you mentioned, it does bring a sense of urgency when people start passing, right? Like when you lose this information, you lose those that direct contact to the swizzle stick, for example. It's got to be painful, and it kind of does bring a sense of urgency. I think people think, oh, you're just relaxing, just taking your time building this, and it's like, well, in a way, yes, but you feel that urgency because the information as we speak is fading away.
Yeah. So I will say the swizzle stick has been the hardest to research because the original inventor died in early 2000s. So I had no chance of getting any of that information. I was like 7 at the time, 8. But I did find a friend of an engineer that worked on this. But the problem is another engineer that helped work on this, he had a stroke, and that affected his memory. So he may not have passed, but he has had a medical event that has now prevented him from remembering, stuff from the 1960s. You know what I mean? So that one was another gut punch. It's like, he is alive. This man is around. He just can't remember it because of a simple medical, or not, it's not simple, but, a
common medical, like, strokes are very common,
that, obviously affected his life. So, if that had not happened, he probably would have had some leads for me to go look in. Because how you start is like, I started with this patent and I requested for this particular design the case file from the patent office. So when you submit a patent, you submit a whole host of additional documentation. And in that packet, I was able to get a ton of new clues that led me to NASA. It led me to a military base that it was tested on. It led me to additional people that may have worked on it. So when you get like this data, you just gotta look for names, places, additional names. I didn't even know it was named Swizzle Stick until I got this corporate company project memo about it, and it had the Swizzle Stick name. So I'm like, okay, I know this rocket exists. The patent calls it something, but I don't know what the company called it and marketed it as. Well, they had this memo paper in the patent. Now I have a name, and that opened the door. So when I went to NASA, they went through their records and they looked up Swizzle Stick. Well, they had a partial, collection of photos. So there's probably dozens, if not hundreds of photos that are missing that I have a bounty on. If you can find those photos, I think I have it like $750 or something. If you can find those, that money is yours.
And you will happily, you would be overjoyed if someone found those.
I mean, I've spent that much trying to find the photos already. Yeah. I paid researchers to go to the National Archives to look for these specific photos, and I still have someone doing that to this day. So, the research, it costs a lot of money to do, but I feel like at the end of the day, I think the 3 first books have been working to this kind of, I won't say it's my last book, but it's the most in-depth in any topic that I've ever covered. So the other topics, you might find books that won't have like the build diary, but they'll be very detailed on like the history, more detailed than I can do. But with this book, I think it is the most detailed book of any book on this category of weapons.
It is really your magnum opus, it seems like, in the way of, it's all these skills you've learned in creating books and launchers themselves, as far as reaching the pinnacle of these and doing this research, finding these things out. It almost, following you on Twitter, everyone follow Wild Arms and Research, it feels like you're watching a TV show where you're discovering new, because as soon as you discovered that video, you posted the video as well, and the velocity test video. And it feels really like you're following you, like pick up these clues. And you mentioned just one word, just in the memo. These bits of research, hanging on to one thing, you may catch one thing that breaks a whole a chain open for you.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I've learned different ways of getting information. So another way, a lot of these engineers have passed away. But the thing with using social media and stuff, I found family members of these people. So with another style of kinetic energy rocket, there was a more advanced one that came out like 10, 20 years later. Most of the engineers from that project have passed away as well. But from the National Archives, I recovered a bunch of tapes from that time period that had like conferences, it had test fire videos, it had all of this research, and I was able to give that to the family that they otherwise may have not have ever found. And I felt kind of good about that. I was like, okay, I'm at the end of the day, I'm doing this for me. I'm doing this for the community. But I felt like that was a good way to give back. It was like, thank you for giving me, tips or clues of what I could look for. Here is some videos that I've, found that show your family in their work. And I hope that's beneficial for them. And same with the photos I got from the NASA. I handed those first to the family of the engineer that developed or invented it. And I hope, it was kind of through a third party. So hopefully that, they're happy. They got to see photos of like their granddad that they never got to, meet or may have not met. But it provided, I think it's beneficial, not just for me, not just for our community, but the people that are related to the actual real people that invented it too.
No, that's so awesome. That's such a cool story. I know your heart was fluttering when you got to do that, because that's so awesome, man. That's mm-hmm. It's amazing. And if people want to contribute to these research bounties, how does that work? You have a Discord set up. People can reach out to you directly.
Yeah, if they want to participate in the research bounties, they can just reach out in any of my platforms. I've got to verify the photos are real and stuff, but if you found the photos, tell me where you found them. Let me, see them. If everything checks out, the funds are yours. They'll send it PayPal, Zelle, whatever way you want it to, but that's what they're set up for. There are people that are better at researching things than me, and I want to pay for that stuff. So, and I could pay one person to do it, but they might not find it. But if I have, 20 people spending a couple hours of their time thinking of different ways to find that information, you open up the possibility, and they're not committing too much of their time, to look for it. No. So I figured if there's a community looking, you're going to get the leads. And a lot of leads that I found have been from random people or people that may not even, person they just saw like a $50 bounty, and they spend 5 minutes in the patent, website, Google patents, and they found like something cool, and they're like, oh, this isn't what you're looking for, but I think this is useful. And that's exactly how I found this project, which, the rocket that I originally wanted to make is a lot more complicated, uses a lot more parts. It's a lot more expensive. With this rocket, the cost is like a tenth of the price that I'm going to be paying per rocket.
It's a ridiculous amount. That's so awesome. And that shows too, like, if you come across something or if someone comes across something that they think is interesting, reach out to you. You love seeing new rocket stuff that you haven't seen before. You really dig the videos, are super into it. And so even if someone isn't participating in a bounty, but they find something interesting, they come across a manual, they are a family member of an engineer of some kind, send it to you. You will very much enjoy taking a look at it.
Yeah, and I don't try to like hoard any of the information I find. I keep some things that I want to be like special for the book, to be like first release. But all the research that I've gotten is all going to be out there for everyone to see. And I think if you've got anything cool to share, I'm more than happy to see it, and I want the community to see it too. I think that's a big important part.
No, definitely, like preserving that information we talked about. So I want to take a look here. I've got something cool to show you on Instagram that I want you to take a look at. This is the beer Zuka. So your beer is empty, and you slam it down, and it launches the the empty beer out of the can. What do you think of this ingenuity? I think this is awesome. This seems very 3D printable.
Oh yeah, definitely. I like it. There's another one that I saw that was kind of like this, but it was for a mortar. So you have a beer bottle, like a glass one, and you drop it into the mortar tube, and it pops the lid off, and then you can drink the beer. I love that stuff.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, like small feats of ingenuity like that. So fun. So when should people be looking for that book? First of all, going into plugs, thank you for coming on. Everyone file it's Wild Arms research development everywhere, right? Like Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You post videos on YouTube frequently.
I try to as frequently as I can.
As frequently as you can. Tons of cool information. We've got the kinetic energy missile test right here. Just super cool stuff. When should people be expecting this fourth book to come out? The process is obviously super long. It's going to take a while to. You mentioned like all the research and everything like that. When should people be expecting this?
I'm hoping to have it done by the end of the year. I kind of was hoping to have it done by the end of last year, but the actual science behind it was, I think on my first test and had the rocket explode on the static test, I was like, okay, this is going to require a bit more, it's going to require more tests to nail down the science. But I think by the end of this year, I should have the rocket motor perfected. Finding somewhere to test it to is going to be a tricky one. My options are limited. It's travel from Florida to like Arizona and Nevada, or I fire remotely in the Gulf of America.
Firing into the Gulf is kind of fire. That's kind of interesting.
In the Gulf, like I would have a remote boat, so I've got to either collab with someone who has a drone boat, or just build one myself, but test fire while I'm in the ocean, because you have to be like 3 to 20 miles, something like that, off the coast to be in federal, ocean. Because I can't go to international waters. I have to stay within U.S. territory, and then test it safely. Because like these rockets will go like 5 to 10 miles, and your average gun range. I mean, you'll have like even the biggest range, like 1,000 yards, and then 1 to 2 miles past that, you're going to have like residential neighborhoods, and these rockets can go way past those residential neighborhoods. So I'm going to be very careful where I test. So that's a huge part, but I'm aiming for the end of the year to be able to test this, and then have the book shortly after. I think I've got almost all the research ready to go. I'm just waiting on a few more Freedom of Information Act requests to be returned back to me.
Which can take a while for those who don't know. Yeah. The FOIA request can take an indefinite amount of time.
My last one took 2 years. But, I've gotten it down. I've annoyed these people that they will push my stuff through. I'm even got several in appeals right now. So they denied my first request. I put in appeals. I'm hoping that I did a good report. It was like a 10-page, essay on why they should give me what I want. So, hoping to hear back on that. But, the research part is, I'm still waiting on a few things. It's the development part, getting the rocket motor ready and then testing it, and then able to just, put all my research into that book. I'm hoping to get it done by the end of the year.
And again, everyone go follow him. The process is fantastic to watch, to see it come together. Again, like you mentioned, you're holding information for the book, obviously, because we want people to buy the book. Everyone go buy his other books as well, by the way. Lauded on Amazon. Great coffee table books, by the way. Talk about getting people interested in your home. You have some guests over and hand them the launcher books.
I think James Reeves has put it in his community library box. I think on the side of the road sometimes people have a little box for books. I think I consistently always send him a book just to mess with him, and he puts them all in there.
That's awesome.
That's some funny books to read.
Yes, absolutely do that. That is awesome. He's a funny guy. Absolutely do that. Put it in your neighborhood box. Spread the good word. And you post through this process, you explain things as you go. It's such a fun journey to watch. It really is a drama, seeing all the twists and turns. And I personally want to thank you from the community. The work you do is invaluable. The information you provide is invaluable. And your collection of it will be here for generations to come, which is so important as we look at this lost information and everything of that nature. So thank you, man, and thank you for coming on. And
Thanks
is
for
there
having me.
absolutely is there anything you want to close us out on?
No, I think that's everything. I think, thanks for the opportunity, spreading the good word. I mean, we don't know how long these books are still going to be illegal with the way things are going nowadays. So get it while you can. But I'm here for the journey. I think I kind of get frustrated with myself sometimes. Like I really want to finish this, but the fun in it is kind of going through the process step by step. And I hope to show that out to everyone.